dragon! Tell me the truth of it!
Just like its predecessor, House of the Dragon Episode 7 is filled with high drama, political backstabbing, literal stabbing, rifts between families, and an uncomfortable relationship between Targaryen family members. In this video, we will take a look at some of the things you might have missed in the episode, and what it could all mean going forward. And yes, there will be spoilers. Let's first start off with the end of the episode, and the fake out of Laenor Velaryon's death. Obviously, romance has been brewing between Rhaenyra and Daemon for some time, but whether it be age, or a spouse, or an angry Viserys, there was always, as Kurt Cobain would say, something in the way. But during episode 7, the pair decided they could stay apart no more and would pave the way for their eventual union. With Daemon's former wives and Harwin Strong already meeting grisly ends, it seems that Rhaenyra's husband Laenor would also meet a similar fate, especially as Daemon conspired with his lover Qarl. But instead of choosing violence, Rhaenyra and Daemon decided to spare Laenor, faking his death and shaving his hair, so he and Qarl could flee under the cover of darkness for a life together in the East, with everyone ending up happy. Well, except for Corlys and Rhaenys, who presumed that their son had been murdered, and the random guy whose neck Daemon snapped. But otherwise, happy days for everyone involved. However, this is somewhat different from the book. Now, while House of the Dragon has for the most part stayed loyal to the source material, Fire and Blood, as we have mentioned in other videos, there have been times where they have diverged, and in particular where the book has been ambiguous as to the details of events. House of the Dragon has been much more cut and dry. That is the case in the book for Laenor's death as well. As Laenor did die in the book, the true conspirator behind his murder was unknown. As written by Martin, Sir Laenor Velaryon, husband to the Princess Rhaenyra and the putative father of her children, was slain whilst attending a fair in Spicetown, stabbed to death by his friend and companion Sir Qarl Corey. The two men have been quarreling loudly before blades were drawn. Merchants at the fair told Lord Velaryon when he came to collect his son's body. Corey had fled by then, wounding several men who tried to hinder him. Some claimed a ship had been waiting for him offshore. He was never seen again. Similar to the show though, while it is never confirmed, it is heavily inferred that Daemon was behind the murder. Now this is actually a reference to episode 6, but we didn't cover it at the time because it would have been spoilers. But Aemond losing his eye was foreshadowed early on. When we first meet his sister Helena in episode 6, she was playing with a collection of bugs and talking in cryptic sentences, which was all pretty creepy to be honest. As she listened to her brother Aemond talk to Alicent about his desire for a dragon, Helena says, "He will have to close an eye."
He'll have to close an eye.
Flash forward to episode 7 and Aemond does indeed gain a dragon after bonding with the old Vhagar, but in return loses an eye after a scuffle with his nephews. The scuffle and the loss of the eye will definitely come up again, but more on that later. Helena is seemingly another member of the Targaryen house to have dragon dreams. Dragon dreams affect those with the blood of the dragon, who are known to have premonition-like dream abilities, and they often involve dragons, but not always. Also, if you listen to what she says after the funeral in episode 7, she's fixated on the loom of fate weaving threads of black and threads of green, which is of course a reference to the upcoming Dance of Dragons, suggesting she has had prophetic dreams to the Targaryen civil war. I imagine that's how all book readers feel watching the show. As Rhaenyra becomes more and more powerful and confident in her role as heir, her look is designed to reflect that, and in particular, her hair. As the episodes go by, the braids of the hair of the heir, gotta love the English language sometimes, have become more and more bold and intricate, reflecting Rhaenyra's demeanor as a whole. This is very similar to Daenerys in Game of Thrones, who also wore more intricate braids as the show went on, and she continued to pick up victories against her foes. Although this is admittedly linked to the Dothraki tradition as opposed to Targaryen custom. Whether or not Rhaenyra is sporting her hair to mirror the Dothrakis, or if it's just an Easter egg to her descendant Daenerys is unclear. But either way, it's a nice touch, and I am intrigued to see what her hair will look like in the season finale. I'm expecting a full model of King's Landing or a Targaryen family tree weaved into her hair. As we mentioned, as the show ramps up to the infamous Dance of the Dragons and the war between the green and the black factions, we can expect to see them wearing their sides' colors proudly for the world to see. In episode 7, once again the House of the Dragon youngsters are wearing their team's colors, with Alicent's children Aegon and Aemond wearing green, the war color of House Hightower, which makes them look more like Malfoys than Targaryens, while Rhaenyra's children continue to wear the red and black of House Targaryen. Continue to keep an eye on the colors the characters wear as we approach the finale. Okay, I did consider dropping this one as it is spoilery, but I will try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. As we mentioned, Aemond loses an eye after having a scuffle with his nephews Jace and Lucerys after he bonded with Vhagar. And in the aftermath of the fight, Alicent calls for the eye of one of the boys in return. Now, as you can guess, this will not be the last of the feud between the boys, especially as they are in the opposing factions. And this whole eye for an eye call will come to a head in one of the most memorable moments in the book. And the string of events that took place in episode 7 will have a massive knock-on effect when it comes to Dance of the Dragons. But that's all I'm saying right now, because we are entering spoiler territory. After Laena's return to the sea, the Targaryen family members converse awkwardly amongst themselves, and there is a bunch of information flung around in this short period of time that you might have missed. In particular, the upcoming Green Wedding. As Aegon chats with his younger brother, he complains about the fact that he has to marry his sister Helaena, claiming that she is odd, while Aemond says he would have no qualms marrying her if it were for the good of House Targaryen. In the previous episode, Rhaenyra suggested marrying Helaena to her son Jace in a bid to bury the hatchet, but in reality protect the legitimacy of her sons, which Viserys was all for. But this is knocked back by Alicent as she planned to marry Helaena to her son Aegon to shore up the family bloodlines. As we said, this Green Wedding will happen, and be likely less traumatic as other Game of Thrones weddings. But that's all we'll say on the matter. As we saw, Aemond finally has his dragon, and as both he and his grandfather Otto mentioned, having Vhagar on their side is a massive win for the Greens, seeing as Vhagar is one of the biggest and oldest dragons around. But how exactly did Aemond convince a dragon like Vhagar, one who had been initially missing for some time, to bond with him? Well, it turns out Aemond was paying close attention to what his siblings and nephews were taught in the Dragon Pit in episode 6, as he utters the exact same phrases they learnt in order to bring the dragon to heel. The first thing Aemond says to Vhagar is Daharis, the High Valyrian word for serve. Now, for all of you Throne fans, that word may sound familiar, and for good reason, as Valar Daharis means all men must serve, and it's a phrase that often answers Valar Morghulis, which means all men must die, which you likely heard a few times in Game of Thrones. Daharis is used on the dragons the same way the word heel is used for dogs, and it's the same word Rhaenyra says to Syrax in episode 1, to calm the dragon down, and it's how Jace brought Vermax to heel in episode 6. Although Aegon may be the oldest, Aemond's actions in episode 7 show that he is not only the most tenacious youngster out of the group, that he is also one of the biggest threats to Rhaenyra and the Blacks, especially as he now rides Vhagar. While some similarities can be drawn between the Greyjoys and the Velaryons, especially their relationship to the sea, one of the biggest differences is to whom they choose to worship. The Greyjoys in Game of Thrones worship the drowned god at the Iron Islands, while the people who come from lands around the Narrow Sea worship a god called the Merling King, who the Velaryons claim gave them the Driftwood Throne. The Merling King is an ancient demigod who seemingly ruled over the waters and islands in the Narrow Sea, and his name is likely a reference to being a merman as opposed to the wizard from Arthurian tales. In Game of Thrones, there is a ship named after the demigod, and it is the ship that Sansa and Littlefinger board to escape King's Landing after the death of Joffrey. Of course, our attention has been focused on the trouble of succession once Viserys kicks the bucket and who will rule Westeros after him. But there is one line of succession that is also in doubt, that of who will ascend the Driftwood throne after the Sea Snake dies. With Laenor presumed dead and Lyanna actually dead, Corlys's line is in doubt. And although he is lining up Lucerys to rule Driftmark someday, he is less than enthused. And on top of that, there are many in the Velaryon household who do not want to see Rhaenyra's illegitimate children ruling in their name. While Corlys is seemingly content with focusing on the name of the children as opposed to their blood, continue to keep an eye on the difficult times of merging in Driftmark, especially as the events of the Dance of the Dragons unfold. Oh Viserys, in the words of Mark Corrigan, you're not a bad person, but I'm afraid to say you are a moron. While in Game of Thrones, they said that it's the people who don't want to lead that make the better rulers, that isn't necessarily always the case. and Viseri's inability to keep all his ducks in a row is causing escalating tensions in Westeros. Part of the reason Viserys is struggling is that he is still pining over his late wife Aemma, something which we saw in episode 6 as he wept while holding her ring. To show that Aemma is still always on his mind, as he heads off to bed after Lyanna's funeral, he calls Alicent Aemma by mistake, loud enough so basically the whole court could hear this major moment of embarrassment. Sir Harold Westerling quickly attempts to save the situation by asking, "Shall I see after Queen Alicent, your grace?" But the moment is already enough to make everyone awkward. But what are the effects of this Freudian slip? Well, it could make Alicent question her place as queen and the hold she has over Viserys, while it also suggests that Viserys' mental capabilities are beginning to fade, which can be added to his ever-growing list of ailments. It's just a good thing he didn't say Rachel. And ending on a general piece of trivia, the drift-marked Velaryon theme is the same melody as the song, "It's Always Summer Under the Sea," that Princess Shireen sings in Game of Thrones. In the book, she learned this song from her fool Patchface, who supposedly spent time with the Sea People after being shipwrecked. Shireen actually says more about the whole Dance of Dragons and this era of time, but that would be getting into spoilers, and I don't want HBO to cut me off. Although there is this one point when,